Hello, my name is JANEK Simon. I'm really happy to be here, so thank you On for Productions for inviting me. What am I going to present here is a project that is actually quite complex and long-term. So maybe I'll just start with saying that actually the project is composed out of two films. One film is directed by Nigerian director Niji Akani, and this film is actually a remake of a famous Polish film from 1958, directed by Andrzej Wajda, who is the most acclaimed Polish film director. And the other film, directed by me, is, I would say, a documentary essay about the process of development, production, and reception of that remake. So I'm in this project, I take a double role. I'm a producer that went to Nigeria to produce a remake of a Polish film, and I also am a director of the kind of remake. Not a remake, a making of, sorry. So I will say a few words about how this project is kind of placed and rooted in my broader practice as an artist. In the last 10 years, I've been developing projects that I would call geographical experiments. So projects that deal with relations of places in space, in the world, in different ways. What is especially interesting for me is how Poland positions itself on the kind of global map, I would say. And this mental geography of Polish imaginary of itself in the space is usually very reduced, and it basically shows Poland as being placed between Germany and Russia, and this is how somehow how the dynamics is created. So Poland is between Germany and Russia, and then there is some nobody knows what. So I was interested in moments when this was somehow transgressed. So maybe I'll just mention two things. One was a major project that was developed around unrealized Polish dreams of colonies from the 30s. Probably you don't know, but Poland desperately wanted to get a colony in the 30s, as every free nation. That was the argument. Every free nation deserves a colony. So Poland tried to get a colony in the 30s, and I did research on this. Stories. And the other project that I would like to mention is a research on black market informal trade networks that linked Poland and Asia in 1980s. This is also a very interesting story that somehow then I think it has implications on what happened in Poland after 1989 and the transformation from communism into capitalism. These projects usually consist of research, but also of a practical kind of performative part. So that's why I call them experiments. I don't only do research, but I also try to kind of make a practical, performative part of it. And one of these projects, dealing with the circulation of electronic waste, you know, all these old refrigerators, computers, telephones, brought me to Nigeria, to Alaba International, which is a market in Lagos, the biggest city in Nigeria, which is a huge electronic waste market. But apart from that, it is also a place where I went there in 2009. First time I went to Nigeria in 2009. Researching, this is something that was not really made public at that time. What is happening with all that electronic waste? So I thought that it's interesting to actually see it. How does it look like when it ends up in Africa? But this place is also. This market is also a place where Nigerian industry was born in the early 90s. And accidentally, I became friends with some people who worked in this industry when I was in Lagos, and I got really actually fascinated with it. So I'll just say a few words about Nollywood, about the Nigerian film industry. Well, the legend says that sellers from Alaba International, the market that I mentioned before, imported blank VHS tapes from Taiwan in the early 90s, and they couldn't sell them, so they started recording football games or music videos from the TV, from the satellite TV, to sell tapes, which worked. But then someone got an idea to actually shoot a video, a home video, a kind of DIY film, and put it on these tapes to sell them. So, and from that emerged something that is now, and one of these home videos actually became a hit, and it grew, and it became something that is now the second biggest film industry in the world after the Indian one, after Bollywood. And what is really significant and exceptional is that Nollywood actually completely wiped out American films from Africa, from Nigeria. So nobody watches American films, there is Nigerian films. And I think this is amazing, and we should really, I mean, peripheries really should learn from this case of somehow confronting the hegemony of the center. So I'm really fascinated with Nollywood, and maybe I will just make a small remark on how I place myself on the kind of global map. I'm from Eastern Europe, and I think that Eastern Europe is fundamentally different from Western Europe. So there is a big difference, and the boundary on Elbe River, the river that divided East and West Germany, has been actually replicating itself through the history in different symbolic configurations. So that was where the influence of Roman Empire ended in early days. Then feudal systems on both sides of this river actually developed in a completely different directions. Then, of course, communism. So this is there's something real about this boundary that symbolic frameworks change, but this boundary is still there, and I think this is also becoming quite obvious now with what is happening with all this fascist turn in Eastern European politics. So I think we are not exactly the West, I mean East Europe. So well, I will not go further, not develop this further, but I think this is very important for for how I place myself in relation to this project. So I had this idea actually kind of in my head to what would happen if I would come back to Nigeria and start and give one of the directors a Polish script. What would come out of it? What would be the reaction? And yeah, at some point I just decided to try. So I went to Lagos again in 2012 with a Polish film, which is Ashes and Diamonds by Andrzej Wajda, which was released in 1985. And maybe I will say a few words about this film, because it's also very important for this project. Well, first of all, it was this film was really important. Maybe I will show you a short fragment.
Uważaj, ona broń! Gdzie jest? Chodźcie! Czas na wodę! Dawaj!
Yeah, so this is the end. The main hero dies, and he does not even care about it. I think this is my interpretation of this scene, and it somehow shows the kind of cliché or romantic hero that is a fundament of Polish national mythology, I would say. But this film, well, it tells a story of an anti-Nazi resistance freedom fighter that does not know what to do after the end of World War II, how to relate to the new communist government being installed by Soviets in Poland. So there's this kind of ethical dilemma whether the resistance should accept the communist government or fight against it. But this film is somehow interesting and still relevant today because it shows two narrations about communism that exists in Polish public sphere today. And so I'll just shortly depict them. One is coming from the pre-war elites and basically sees communism as a loss of sovereignty, as a kind of Soviet occupation. So communist Poland was not really Poland from that perspective. This was like a Soviet colony or whatever. So this is the hegemonic point of view now. This has been the hegemonic point of view since the 89. But the other way of thinking about what communism was sees it as a modernizational project. Big public housing, where housing projects were developed during that time. There were extensive programs of public healthcare, free education were introduced. So this is also totally true, no? And so there are these two narrations that exist and which were never really negotiated. So they still, even today, create tension in the Polish political discourse. So I think this film works as a certain sort of a projective test. So it's very open-ended. The interpretation of it really depends on your kind of ideological framework. So that's why I think that it really is interesting. But it, of course, is also very much rooted in Polish history, Polish culture, I mean, the romantic narrative. To just say the last thing about this film, it is considered one of the seminal achievements of the Polish film school, and Martin Scorsese once said that this is the best film ever, that was ever shot in the world. So this is a kind of a really significant and great film. So when I went to Nigeria, I started showing this film to Nigerian to Nollywood directors and started discussing what they think about it, what were their kind of thoughts about it. And one of them, which is Niji Akani, the director that I mentioned before, actually came up with an idea that that kind of convinced me that this project is worth working on, that this somehow worth pushing forward. Niji Akani is an established Nigerian director. He considers himself off Nollywood, but of course he's also somehow submerged in the system there. And his film Heroes and Zeros achieved 3 AMAA awards, which is like the African Oscar, African Academy Award, in 2013. Yeah, so he's a really established filmmaker in Nigeria, and I really love what he's doing. And his idea was to actually translate the story, the Polish story, into the realities of Biafra War. And this was a civil war that happened in Nigeria after one province declared independence. The Biafra declared independence in 1968, and the National Army tried to stop the secession, which led to a very violent and war and a humanitarian crisis. And this is still a kind of volatile and repressed political topic in Nigeria. There is censorship that stops themes that can kind of ignite tensions between ethnic groups. So it's a kind of a censored topic. And what Niji Akani said is that because this film would be produced with money that comes from outside, and because the censorship is kind of getting weaker and weaker now, it could be possible to actually make this film happen. So I think, well, this is really exciting, because this is exactly what the Wajda's film was in the 58. Yeah? It was a really significant political event for Poland. So we can kind of replicate this effect possibly. So I think, wow, this is amazing, and this somehow made me take an effort to find the money to actually make this film happen. I will not go into details of differences between Niji's, because it's already, the script is written. I will not go into details because it's a really long story. What can I say? But maybe I will just quote Niji's statement. My primary intention is to make this film a deeply affecting illustration of the human cost of the Nigeria-Biafra War, one of the most destructive armed conflicts in contemporary history of Africa. The dramatic narrative of this film is for me only a convenient vehicle to present a visual tableau of scenes and scenarios that collectively, with varying individual emphasis, richly document their poignant physical horrors and deep psychological dislocation borne by millions of common citizens of Biafra who were either forced or persuaded to wage that long, wasteful war to uphold a watery nationalist dream. So this is the beginning of his statement. I will not go further into the details because I don't have time. But I will just say that this film will be released into cinematic distribution in Nigeria. So it will be just normally released in Nigeria. And because this whole project heavily relies on local context, both Polish and Nigerian, I thought that that there is a certain need for a bridge that will somehow make it easier to make this project public, and that's why I'm directing this kind of making of documentary about it. So this is the way that this project will be made public to national audiences, to international audiences, hopefully. And yeah, this is just a small production. It's shot with a small crew and modest kind of classical artistic means. We want to make it as accessible as possible, if it's possible in this case. And maybe just one last remark, last thought to round things up. I would like to say a few words about, it is also, I should say more about it, but I don't have time, but about the kind of general politics behind this project and maybe my practice in general. So what I think is that actually exchanges between peripheries, and I see Eastern Europe as a periphery, as a semi-periphery, as Nigeria is also a semi-periphery, without mediation of the center, actually makes the center less relevant. Yeah? If we can communicate without mediation of the center, then it makes the center weaker. So this is also somehow maybe a strategy to kind of make the post-colonial condition less kind of relevant, I mean, less stronger. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't show more visuals, but I really thought that I really have to say a lot about this project, and there was no time for it, but of course, if anybody's interested in seeing more, then I'm happy to answer your questions later.